Welcome to participants in today's webinar about the Georgia Manufacturing Survey. My name is Ann Udy. I'm director of the survey. I'd like to thank all of you all for attending the webinar and particularly thank those who filled out the survey. We really appreciate your participation. It made the survey a success. So in today's webinar, I will go over results of the survey, then I will turn the webinar over to some partners who will talk about participation in service provision to address some of the issues in the survey, and then we will open up the webinar to questions via the chat. So, start with some statistics about the Georgia economy because this is very important to understanding the results of the survey. The survey in 2012, the manufacturing economy was not so strong, but by 2014 you can see signs that manufacturing is alive and well in Georgia. We got more than 9,300 manufacturing factories in the state, which is a net increase of about 40 just in the and what I wanted to do was show you where manufacturing output is measured by gross state product and manufacturing employment has gone over the last several years in the line chart on the right-hand side of the slide. So manufacturing output as measured by gross state product is shown in the red line and the y-axis on the right. And you can see that manufacturing output for Georgia declined in 2008 recession, but has steadily increased since then, including over the last 2 years. So manufacturing now accounts for 12% of the state's economy. Also for employment took a big hit in the most recent economic downturn, but you can see it's gradually increasing. In fact, the state of Georgia added 12,500 manufacturing jobs from 2010 to 2013. So, and the wages still are 2 times what a retail worker earns. So this is still an important sector for the economy, and we hope the Georgia Manufacturing Survey helps to contribute to that. A little bit about the survey. Our aims for doing the survey are first to enable benchmarking of manufacturing performance and use of manufacturing technologies and techniques, and second, to help us improve our services to Georgia's manufacturers. So this survey is done every 2 to 3 years, and it's primarily a mail survey, but we also offer web options, which about 50 manufacturers in a given year take advantage of. The survey goes to all manufacturing establishments with 10 or more employees. This year we got more than 500 complete surveys, and I'd like to thank our partners in the survey, the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership at Georgia Tech, Kennesaw State University, Georgia Department of Labor, and Havis, Arrighetti & Wynn, the Georgia headquartered accounting firm. You can find out more about the survey at the website below. There's what we brochure report, which is about 12 pages and the highlights, and then there's a detailed report about 200 pages that you can also download. So the way this webinar will share results, first I'm going to talk about a few survey items dealing with manufacturing challenges, outsourcing and insourcing. Then I'll talk about manufacturing practices related to innovation, R&D, exporting technology use. I'll discuss how manufacturers spend on training, the extent to which they use tax credits, and their use of assistance sources, and then we'll bring this all home for manufacturers and policymakers with a discussion of implications. So one of the baseline measures we have for understanding what is going on in the economy is a question we ask manufacturers to indicate which areas are a significant problem or need for them. And this table compares the results from the 2012 survey and the 2014 survey. And I think over the years I've done the survey, these results are pretty dramatically different between 2 years. So marketing and sales for the last several years in the downturn economy has been the most prevalent problem or need, and it's particularly prevalent among small manufacturers with fewer than 50 employees. But across the whole sample, there's a decline in marketing and sales issues. Also a decline in manufacturing process and lean needs. But there's been a dramatic increase in needs for people with technical skills, even needs for employees with basic skills such as reading, writing, keyboarding, math. We commonly see when there's a growth in the economy that manufacturers tend to have greater needs for employees to help them fill these orders. Also of interest is there's a particular increase in manufacturers' needs for expansion planning, facility layout, new plants, which is promising. And finally, for many years we saw a rise in concerns about energy costs, but between the last 2 years, concerns about energy costs declined from more than 20% in the 2012 survey to 11% by this survey. And we feel that this is a reflection of the decline that energy prices have experienced in the last couple of years. In fact, our survey shows that energy costs as a percent of sales have declined by 6% in the 2014 survey compared to what they were in 2012. So these are results for the sample overall, but we do find some differences by size. Larger firms have particularly more interest in addressing technical and basic skills. Medium-sized firms have the greatest need for expansion planning and facility layout. Small firms, as I previously said, are most concerned about marketing and sales. So now let's turn to the issue of outsourcing and insourcing. This issue always attracts a lot of policy interest, and we've been following it since 2005. And at that time, you see 18% of manufacturers said they moved work from plant in Georgia to either another state or outside the country, and only 11% insourced work from these locations to their Georgia plant. So we weren't sure where those percentages would go. Would it keep going up? Would we find that a quarter of our manufacturers would outsource? We had no idea. They saw by 2008 quite a bit of a decline in the percentage of outsourcing. 2010 it was a little higher, but generally stable. And then for the last 2 surveys, we've seen that the percentage of firms that outsource have declined dramatically, so that by 2014, only 11% of manufacturers outsource. Now, we also in this survey see a decline in insourcing between the 2012 and 2014 surveys, but that is because many firms that outsource also insource. And by the way, the blue line represents the percentage of manufacturers that say they outsource, the red line, the percentage of manufacturers that say they insource, and percentages are shown on the y-axis. So let's go to the next slide and see where this outsourcing and insourcing takes place. So outsourcing locations since 2005, the U.S. is always the #1 location because it's so proximate approximate, but Asia was particularly important in the 2005 survey. But you can see there's been a dramatic decline, particularly in outsourcing to Asia by the 2014 survey. Also outsourcing to Latin America, a particular decline in the 2014 survey. In terms of insourcing locations, the U.S. again always an important sourcing location because of its proximity, but there is pretty much a decline across the board except for insourcing from Latin America locations and from European locations. Now, who does this insourcing and outsourcing? We find that medium and large firms, as shown in the employment bars, tend to outsource more. Insource is represented by the red bars, outsourced by the blue bars, and the percentages are shown across the horizontal axis. So you can see the bars are longer for medium-sized and large manufacturers. They're also higher for insourcing across all industry groups except for machinery. Shops tend to have more of a local market, and they're particularly higher for science-based industries, which we define as those in the pharmaceuticals, chemicals, petroleum, and medical devices. Slide, we're moving to the practice session of the presentation, and one of the areas we have particularly interested in is how manufacturers compete in the market for sales. So we call that strategy. And we're interested in what strategies they particularly prioritize if you rank a list of strategies. Here we're comparing manufacturers that prioritize competing based on innovation versus those that prioritize competing based on low price. And innovation is shown in the red bars. Low price is shown in the blue bars. And here we're looking at outsourcing and insourcing, and those percentages are along the vertical axis on the left. So you see that firms that compete based on low price are more likely to be impacted negatively by outsourcing. The difference between those competing on low price versus innovation is 15% versus just over 5%. Conversely, firms that compete based on innovation tend to be able to benefit from insourcing to a greater extent. With low price strategies, about 10% of those benefit from insourcing. Innovative strategies, about 17% benefit from insourcing. So strategy does play a role in whether or not a firm can benefit from insourcing and be affected by outsourcing. I also like to look at the relationship between firm strategy and profitability. So here again, we're looking at low price strategies that are prioritized versus firms prioritizing innovation strategies. And please pay particular attention to the bar chart on the right-hand side of the slide. The vertical axis represents average return on sales, which is our measure of profitability. The horizontal axis measures the year that the survey is done. The blue bars represent the average return on sales for firms prioritizing low price. The gold bars represent the same for firms prioritizing innovation. Now, one of the good news results from the survey is that firms are much more profitable in the 2014 survey than they were in 2012. In fact, profitability is 13% higher in 2014 than it was in 2012. And interestingly, you see whereas in past surveys, especially from 2005 to 2012, there was a gap, significant gap in profitability between firms prioritizing low price and those prioritizing innovation. By the 2014 survey, this profitability gap has narrowed. So there's only about a little over 1% differential differential in profitability between firms prioritizing low price and prioritizing innovation. And this suggests to us that the current firms that are still in business and compete based on low price have kind of weathered the economic downturn, so they're very good and they're able to take advantage of this growth in business that we've seen in the manufacturing sector over the last 2 years. Now this is a bubble chart, and why we're putting it up here is we want to be able to show not just the return on sales among different types of firms, so they're private returns, but also their contribution to the economy is measured by average wages, so returns to the firm and returns to the broader economy. And here we're looking at the 5 strategies that we have manufacturers rank, and we're showing with the nodes on, or the circles on in the bubble chart, the percentage of respondents that rank this strategy number 1. You can see high quality is the most commonly prioritized strategy. Nearly 60% of manufacturers say they compete primarily based on high quality. Innovation is least common in blue, 6%, green 6% prioritize competition based on innovation. So what we're looking for are nodes that are close to the upper right-hand corner, meaning that they have high average return on sales, so they benefit themselves, and high average wages, so they benefit the economy. So innovation and new technology is closest to that upper right-hand corner, but not by much. There's kind of a narrowing in differences among strategies. It has the highest average return on sales, followed by adapting to customer needs. 20% of manufacturers have prioritized this strategy, followed by high quality, and then quick delivery and low price. And in terms of wages, again, innovation offers the highest wages of about $44,000 annually. That's followed by adapting to customer needs and high quality, which are just over $40,000, and then low price and quick delivery are at the $7,000 range. So you can see there are some differences, not as pronounced as they were in prior surveys, but it does suggest to us that strategy matters. Looking at strategy, we also look at innovation in terms of adoption of various types of innovation activities. And we see that firms are very active in these innovation activities. More than 40% of manufacturers purchase equipment for innovation. 40% sign a confidentiality agreement. In-house R&D, 27% of manufacturers were engaged in in-house R&D. This is quite a bit lower than in prior surveys where the results were kind of about 1/3 of manufacturers engaged in in-house R&D. Then you have planning, development, and training, also above 20%. Then you have another group of activities led by market research that are above 10%, and then you have activities involved with intellectual property and licensing. Those tend to be less common, below 10%. We talked a little bit about R&D, but so that about 27-28% of our manufacturers do in-house R&D, but how does this compare with what other manufacturers in the U.S. do? For this, we're looking at a measure of what we call R&D intensity, which is how much a manufacturer spends on R&D as a percent of sales. This is a common measure in the private sector. And we're going to compare our results with a special run that we got the National Science Foundation to run for us for U.S. manufacturers in these same industries. Now, when we did this in the prior survey, we found that Georgia ratios of R&D expenditures as a percent of sales were quite a bit lower than the U.S. numbers. But you can see for this survey, we look almost the same as the average U.S. firm. And moreover, if we break the results down by industry, where Georgia is shown in the blue bar, and the U.S. is shown in the red bar, and the y-axis or vertical axis shows the R&D percent of sales ratio, you can see that the blue bars are higher than the red bars for almost every industry group except electronics and transportation, and that's because we have a lot of assembly plants, particularly in that industry, that really don't have local R&D in the state. And the bars are particularly higher for science-based industries in Georgia, so I think that bodes well for these particular companies and how they're doing in the state. About open innovation, I don't know if you hear so much about it out there, but we were wondering to what do manufacturers in Georgia actually do open innovation? And by open innovation, we mean, do they look for innovative activities with organizations outside the firm? So we're actually pleased to see that nearly 1 out of every 4 manufacturers that participated in our survey cooperates on innovation with facilities and institutions outside the individual firm. Not surprisingly, the most common partners for innovation are those in the supply chain. So particularly suppliers are common, followed by customers and firms in the same enterprise group for those manufacturers that are part of a large enterprise group and are maybe bench facilities or headquarters. So less common is work with universities and private R&D institutes. So that's something that we're going to take a look at Georgia Tech and see what we can do to be more responsive to you out there. Take a look at exporting. So we know exporting is important because exporters tend to be more profitable than non-exporters. And you can see in the text below, 60% of exporters have higher profitability than non-exporters. Here I'm showing the breakdown of results by what percent of sales comes from exporters, and it's about, most of the bars look the same. Maybe your responses about what you did in 2011 versus what you did in 2013. More than half of the manufacturers didn't do any exporting in those periods, and then the rest, you can see, are quite low, particularly those that got half or more of their sales from export markets. If I were to show you this result from the 2012 survey, much fewer manufacturers had 0 exports. It was kind of in the 40% range. So this suggests to us that there may be fewer manufacturers exporting, perhaps because the economy is so strong, the domestic economy is so strong today compared to what it was in 2012. But we do note that some export markets can bring in more profitability, so it's something to take on board as you look at and review your practices. Another area of interest in to us is use of technologies and techniques that are more prominent in today's manufacturing practice. So in this chart, we're looking at the percentage of manufacturers that use different manufacturing techniques, such as enterprise resource planning, that use and quality systems, that use certain IT practices, and that use certain manufacturing shop floor practices such as robots. So we have a range of technologies. The blue bar shows the percent that use them in 2014. The red bar shows these percentages for 2012. You can see for almost every technology, the red bars are higher than the blue bars. That suggests that there's a little bit less use of investment in current modern and advanced technologies than there was in 2012. And what's more, if we were to show the same chart for plans to acquire these technologies and techniques, there's much fewer percentage of manufacturers that say they plan to acquire or use these technologies and techniques. So that suggests to us that manufacturers are busy with meeting their orders in this kind of growth economy. Also, for some of these technologies, such as maybe additive manufacturing, advanced materials, the technologies are still in flux, and there may be a wait-and-see attitude. But manufacturers that use more technologies and techniques have higher growth in employment. So it's something to think about. A lot of us really were wondering, do technologies supplant workers? So maybe there will be less employment, but we actually find that there's more employment. There's a lot of talk about sustainable manufacturing. One indicator we look at in that regard is whether or not the manufacturer has a technique for inventorying its CO2 emissions. And we do find that it's not very common to do that, except for large manufacturers because of requirements by the EPA. About half of the large manufacturers with 250 or more employees do have an inventory process for measuring their CO2 emissions. To some practices that have implications for policies. And one we like to look at is what's going on in the education and training area. So when we did this survey in 2005, we looked at a number of measures. Prior to that survey, we had looked at hours of training, but we found that many manufacturers did not keep track of how many hours they spent on training. So we're using this measure, median expenditure on training per employee, as an indicator to understand what's going on with trends in training. And we find that manufacturers only spent $200 per employee in training in 2005, and this has continued to go down to 2010, where it's at $100 per employee now, and it's stayed that way for the last 3 surveys. So even though manufacturers say that there are ever greater needs for trained technical workers and even workers with basic skills, there's very little expenditure for these employees. So one possible source of money to provide resources for training employees would be tax credits. Here we're looking at a range of tax credits that are particularly important manufacturers according to our partners at Haber, Getty, and Wynn, and we find that they're not widely used. You can see any one tax credit, fewer than 18% of manufacturers use it. The most commonly used tax credits are jobs tax credits and R&D tax credits, used by 17 and 16% of manufacturers respectively. Then you've got investment tax credit, used by 15%, the new energy tax credit by less than 14%, retraining tax credit, more than 10% use that, and import-export credit not much used. And then lastly, many policies having to do with manufacturers are kind of tax-oriented, which is important, but we feel that having good technical assistance resources are also important. So we ask manufacturers, who do they go to for technical assistance? So more than 1 in 5 manufacturers use Georgia Tech for technical assistance in the past 2 years. That's followed by the Georgia Department of Labor and private sector sources such as accounting firms, consulting firms, suppliers, used by just over 10%. The technical college, just under 10%, and then the other sources are not much used by manufacturers. But you can see that nearly 60% of manufacturers do everything on their own and don't really use external sources. So we wonder, does it matter to use a technical assistance source in terms of firm productivity? So we developed an econometric model, and we did find that manufacturers that were users of Georgia Tech had $20,000 more change in sales per employee than non-users. Now, you could argue that's because maybe there's what kind of call a selection bias, that maybe the best firms use external sources such as Georgia Tech. But even we control for that, we still find this kind of a growth in productivity. So it suggests to us that using good technical assistance resources matters. So just summarize what we saw with the survey. The economy has improved, profitability has improved, that's a good thing, and it's led to more attention to workforce, which is what we commonly see in a growth economy. So we're looking at what manufacturers can do to expand in innovation, training, and manufacturing technologies, because we know that our economy goes through cycles and we want you to be prepared. So we summarize the results by suggesting what you can do to prepare for whatever happens in this phase, if it's more opportunities or if we have another downturn. We suggest please continue to pay attention to innovation. And by innovation, we don't mean you have to have a patent. We mean improve on your products, add new products, new offerings, look at your processes. Can you streamline them on the shop floor, office, in the distribution chain? What can you do to reorganize both within the firm and in your external relationships? Consider targeting export markets, invest in new technologies and techniques, collaborate with external resources, use good technical assistance, and particularly be strategic and train workers and managers. So we also have some suggestions because we have a few policymakers on the line. We have suggestions for what policymakers can do. And we know that there's a temptation in the policy world to focus solely on tax breaks, and we will have our partner talk a little bit about how tax breaks can be used. But in general, we consistently find that they're underutilized. So we think some other things, but sure, have good tax policy, but do some other things to encourage innovation, including incentivizing R&D, collaboration, investment, and supporting good technical assistance. Because many of these activities are kind of hard to do by yourself. There's a lot of what we call knowledge embodied in people, and so it's good to have resources to help you with these things. So with that, I want to remind you to send in your question on the chat feature, which means type in any questions in the chat box, and we will answer them after our next two speakers. And with that, I want to introduce Ori Epstein, who is a senior partner in Habas, Arrighetti, and Wynn's tax practice, and he's very knowledgeable about how to use tax credits in the manufacturing sector. So with that, Ori, the webinar is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really honored to be here. I will just make one comment. I wish I was a senior partner. I'm actually a senior tax manager here at HA&W. But really some great information I think we got out of the manufacturing survey. It's such a great tool for the industry. And as was touched on already, some of the tax incentives and the utilization of those tax incentives by the industry. I'll go a little bit deeper into those, into a few of those, and see, kind of plant some seeds. As I present, I'm going to pose some questions to the audience for you to think about when I'm presenting. Okay, with me for a second. Let me just get the slides up. So I guess we're just we'll get these slides up. Just wanted to have some visual as we go through this. So if you'll give me one minute here, and we'll get this up. You know what, I'm just going to go ahead. I'll go ahead and go start talking through this, and when the slides come up, we'll kind of catch back up. But I'm sure many of you have watched one of these game shows where the contestant gets to go into one of these, like a telephone booth almost, and there's cash flying around the booth, and they have a minute to grab as much cash as they probably can. So many of you would be willing to take your chance in one of those booths to walk away with free money. I bet most of you would take me up on that offer. This could actually be embarrassing, especially if you walk out empty-handed. I've got another idea. One, embarrassing and frankly a lot better odds. You don't need to do anything different. You're entitled to free cash for things you are already doing. So a few questions for you to consider if these things that your company is already doing. Is your business currently building or built a new product line? How many implementing or implemented a new ERP system? How many establishing or have established a new process in your plant, for example, going lean? Sure, a good number of you answered yes to at least one of those questions. So let's how are taking the federal and state research and development tax credit for those activities I just listed? I would guess not as many, and from the slides we saw earlier, there is a large number of Georgia companies that are not taking advantage of that credit. Not taking the credit, you're not alone. According to the previous slide on the 2014 Georgia Manufacturing Survey, 84% of Georgia manufacturers are not taking the R&D tax credit. That means millions of dollars are being left on the table that you could be reinvesting into your business. I recently worked with a prospect, now client, that was claiming $20,000 worth of federal R&D credit, but nothing from Georgia. When we were digging into the work they were actually doing, we felt eligible for $150,000. $150,000 in Georgia R&D tax credits. We were increased the amount of credit on the federal side. In 2013, in total, their federal and Georgia R&D credits were around $250,000. Again, remember, $20,000 just federal only credit, at the end with $250,000 of federal and Georgia R&D credits. Significant amount of money saved, especially when you consider the $20,000 they started from. And that prospect is now a happy client. Question on that topic. What would you do with an additional $250,000? What would your business do with that money? I should now have your attention. So the next set of questions I'd like to pose are, how many of you have hired at least 2 employees this year? I'm sure, again, quite a few of you have hired. It's a very low amount. I'm sure quite a few of you have hired at least 2. Did you, if your manufacturing facility is located in a Tier 1 county, a military zone, or an opportunity zone, then you're eligible to receive a tax credit of up to $4,000 for each job created for up to 5 years. Even in one of those zones, there are still substantial credits available. So the final set of questions I've got for you, did you upgrade your ERP technology this year? Upgrading, or did you integrate a new CRM system this year? Have to train employees on how to use new equipment this year? A few of you have had to undertake that task. But you have taken the Georgia retraining tax credit to help cover the cost of those trainings. The retraining credit covers 50% of your direct costs, up to $500 per full-time employee per training program, up to $1,250 per employee annually. To cover allied instructor costs and wages while they're in training, and reasonable travel expenses. Even of one of the tax credits I just spoke about, you could be keeping more of your hard-earned money and reinvesting it into the continued growth of your business by taking these often overlooked Georgia tax credits. In the money, MyView has a simple review tool that will help your company determine if money is being left on the table. We would win the opportunity to help your company, and I look forward to hearing your questions about these tax credits. Thank you.
Michael. Thank Ori for joining us and tell you a little bit more about the MEP, and we have been one of the sponsors of this survey for many years, and appreciate all that Jen has done with doing the survey. The Georgia MEP is part of a national system. We're federally funded and through NIST MEP. So those of you that are either located in another state or have sites in different states, you also have access to a manufacturing extension partnership organization. I'm not going to talk a lot about what we do, except to say that our mission is to help Georgia manufacturers grow. We are going to post the recording of this webinar at our website, thegeorgiamep.org, and so that it will probably have that posted by Monday. To let you know what we do work with manufacturers in Georgia, and last year we served almost 1,000 manufacturers, and with those we served about 230 manufacturers with projects that report real impacts. We measure our impacts based in the reduced operating costs, and retained sales, investments made, or jobs created. So we have, actually work with companies to have impacts within those companies. The other thing, and the one thing I really want to take the time and mention briefly is that National Manufacturing Day is tomorrow, October 3rd. This was started 3 years ago with the whole purpose to address the skilled labor shortage. That's one of the key findings we had this year, is that trained work is important, whether it's the basic skilled or advanced technical skills. So we want to address the skilled labor shortage, connect with future generations, to the public image, and so we can really let the communities know that manufacturing is important. We have a website that we're using to communicate this year, and then also this year Georgia Tech supports the initiative with tours, educational roundtables, and then also a high school team challenge. I encourage anybody that is interested in participating next year. It's always going to be the first Friday in October, and you work with your regional manager. We've got regions throughout the state with the work with the regional manager. I want to thank everybody for being here, and we're going to check quickly to see if there are any questions, and so I'll make sure that we answer those. I think that, does this indicate that companies compete on low price are better able to weather the downturns?
Questions. So I can answer that is by looking at what happens to companies that compete on price over the periods that we have done the survey, and we find that many of them go out of business. When we did this survey, say a decade ago or more, about 20 to 25% of the manufacturers competed on low price. Now we find only 13% compete on low price. So many of them do go out of business. Now I will say that every manufacturer should pay attention to its cost. That's kind of a given. And same thing with quality in a way. Every manufacturer should have basic quality. But we question whether these alone may be sufficient in periods going forward, especially in this global economy, to maintain competitiveness, because there's always somebody cheaper. Maybe they're in the U.S., they may be in another country. So we think, yes, having attention to prices and costs is important, but it's one of those necessary but not sufficient conditions.
I don't think I have any other questions that have come through. So again, I want to thank everybody for participating in the webinar. Encourage you to use the recording and share the information with other people within your organization. It will be posted, like I said, early next week at our site, www.amep.org. And then again, encourage you to really consider participating in the National Manufacturing Day, either tomorrow or next year, the first Friday in October. Look forward to making contact with each of you. Thank you again, Ori and Jan, for making this presentation. Thanks so much.